Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. It's Dr. Ben here. I'm a naturopathic doctor empowering you to heal yourself with whole food plant-based nutrition, as well as mind-body medicine. And today on the podcast, we are talking about anti-nutrients. We have covered these compounds before, things like oxalates, lectins, and phytates. Those are really three classes of anti-nutrients. Today, we're digging in deeper to discuss oxalates. But before we do, just want to make a brief announcement, actually two announcements. The first two, the main two things that are on my mind right now, first of all, is the next Whole Food Plant-Based Challenge that is already on the calendar. You can find out more, and there'll be like a pop-up to join at www.alter.health. This one's all about weight release. It's funny. So Suzanne and I were just kind of sitting and talking to ourselves like, wow, who would have thought that we would be like focusing on weight release and weight loss? But it turns out that as you know, that we don't really focus on that. We focus on increased health and gut health and detoxification. And a side effect is weight release. So this is going to be all the information empowering you to, yes, release weight, say goodbye forever, not lose it and then maybe find it again, but say goodbye to forever. The second thing is the meal guide membership. This is just $11 a month to get healing meals delivered to your inbox, to your email inbox, not to your mailbox. I wish we could package them up and get some meal delivery service that like has hot meals at your doorstep or something like that. But no, these are recipes that are crafted by Dr. Susanna, healing, balanced, whole food, plant-based recipes that will support you in achieving your health goals. So that leads us to our conversation today, which is on the topic of oxalates. Like I said, specifically focusing in on that one compound that is, we'll just first talk about what oxalates are, the foods that are higher in oxalates, what the alleged issues are with oxalate consumption, and how and why and when we might consider monitoring our oxalate intake, and in the cases why we might consider not worrying for a second about oxalate intake. And at the end, we're going to focus on really what the main goal is, which is increasing our oxalobacter bacteria in your gut. So that is really the main goal, the big picture focus. So stay tuned towards the end. We'll be talking about more gut health stuff there. So first, what are oxalates? And I typed it in the old Google machine, or actually I don't use Google, but I went to the Wikipedia page for oxalates, and I was had a flashback to organic chemistry. And if you took organic chemistry in high school or college, maybe you remember what an oxalate anion looks like. And it is an anion that binds onto a cation to form or oxalic acid is an anion, or oxalate is the anion that forms onto a cation to create an oxalic acid compound. So that is actually the way in which we get a lot of minerals in our plant foods are in the form of oxalates, as well as other kind of compounds where we've got the anion and the cation. The cation is the mineral, things like magnesium and calcium and iron, etc. And then those cations need to be bound onto something. So oxalate is one thing that those minerals bind onto. So it just makes sense. Wherever we find oxalates, we find minerals, because they go hand in hand, like quite literally from an organic chemistry perspective. So the foods that are highest in minerals, at the top of the list is spinach. That's like at the top of the list. And it's funny, whenever I'm looking at these high oxalate food lists, a lot of people get a lot of fear around kale. And, they're like, oh my gosh, don't eat too much kale. It's going to give you kidney stones. And yeah, that's one of the alleged issues with oxalate consumption. We'll talk a lot about kidney stones. But people talk about kale and then, like other things. And it's really spinach. Spinach has actually like 500 times more oxalate than kale. And so if we really want to monitor our oxalate consumption, it's quite easy. We just really be mindful of eating spinach. And then also at the top of the list is beet greens and beets and rhubarb. I have to admit that I don't eat a lot of rhubarb, but rhubarb is way up there, and chard is another green. And then there's a lot of vegetables because like I said, plants, like all plants, as far as I know, have some oxalate because that is, again, how the minerals exist in the plant, in that oxalate cation anion relationship. So foods like okra, potatoes, turnips, sweet potatoes, and as well as like generally all nuts and seeds have a moderate amount of oxalates. I think almonds kind of have a significant amount. Soy products, soybeans, and other legumes have a considerable amount of oxalates. So really, as you can see here, again, I'll say it again, every plant food has some amount of oxalates. So eating a plant-based diet is essentially, it's impossible to stay away from oxalates. That being said, as you know, I don't have to tell you, you've probably heard about these things. You've probably, heard people saying, oh, I wouldn't eat all that spinach. I wouldn't eat all that kale, yada, yada. It's got a lot of oxalates in it. It might give you kidney stones. It might cause you gut issues, etc., and so forth. And just right off the bat here, I want to kind of ask the audience, I know that we've got audience members who are whole food plant-based eaters and people who are kind of just dabbling in this lifestyle. But anyone who is more or less like whole food plant-based, clean, focusing on the whole foods, the vegetables, and eating all these high oxalate foods, I just want to ask the audience if anyone has experienced any side effects, bad negative effects, issues from high oxalate consumption. Because if you are eating plant-based, again, you are higher than average a higher than average oxalate consumer. And to be quite honest, I put myself and probably many of our clients at Alter Health really in probably the top 1% of oxalate consumers. We are eating more oxalates than virtually anyone on the planet because we're eating plants and a lot of the green leafy vegetables, etc. And I have never had a kidney stone. All of the clients that I've ever worked with have never had a kidney stone when following this sort of high oxalate consumption plant-based diet. So it begs the question, like, why is that? So we're going to talk more about like why, like what the issue is with oxalates. And of course, as you're kind of already grasping, it's contextual. It's not just like oxalates are bad, you got to stay away from them. So what are the alleged issues? We talked about the foods that are high in oxalates, which are all plant foods, but the spinach and chard and rhubarb and beets and beet greens at the top, and kale, by the way, just as a reminder, kale is about, I think it's like 2 milligrams of oxalates in a cup of kale versus like 800 in a cup of spinach. So what are the alleged issues with oxalate consumption? I've already kind of brought up one, the big one, which is kidney stones. And that makes a lot of sense because actually when you look at the stone, it's actually 95% of the time or something like that, it's a calcium oxalate stone. So one would just naturally say, okay, well, I've got calcium oxalate in my kidneys, so I should be mindful of my consumption of oxalate. Of course, that's the doctor recommendation. That's the conventional guidance. And again, that kind of makes sense. But the bigger question is, why is that kidney stone forming? So kidney stones, again, we're going to unpack each one of these topics in a lot greater detail. That's one issue. Another issue that people hear around calcium or around oxalate consumption is just general interference with mineral absorption. And this is kind of paradoxical because, again, I already said that a lot of the high oxalate foods just happen to also be high in calcium and high in other minerals. If you consider like spinach is an awesome source of calcium and an awesome source of all the other minerals, and also an awesome source of oxalate. That's again because the minerals are bound onto compounds and phytonutrients like oxalate. So yeah, there's this kind of alleged issue that if we eat too many oxalates, we're going to have mineral depletion or mineral deficiency. We're going to create a mineral deficiency. Again, like just right on the surface, it's like, oh, we're eating all these high mineral foods, but somehow we're going to have a mineral deficiency. Things already don't add up. And then The third real issue that I hear, and feel free to let me know if I'm missing anything, any other alleged kind of issues that oxalate present the human physiology. But some people just classify this big issue in like terms of systemic inflammation and gut microbiome imbalances and stuff like that. I just, again, search the internet for oxalate causing health issues. And, I found articles around oxalates causing Hashimoto's and oxalates causing other autoimmune conditions, oxalates, causing like, inflammatory bowel disease and all sorts of systemic inflammatory conditions. So let's unpack all this stuff, and let's start with the mineral, the access to our mineral kind of conversation. And everything is as it always is. Everything is pretty well tied together and connected. And the issue that some people might face when eating oxalates is that if they don't have the bacteria in their gut that help them to break down the fiber and phytonutrients that those oxalates are tied up with, then the minerals will stay connected with the oxalates. The calcium oxalate will stay connected, the iron oxalate, the magnesium oxalate, they'll all stay connected with that in that compound, and we won't have the access to those individual mineral cations to put to use in our body. But fortunately, when we do eat whole plant foods that are fiber rich and also oxalate rich and rich in other phytonutrients, we cultivate the diversity of our microbiome, and specifically lead to the proliferation of a species of microbes that have been extensively studied for the last 40 years. And those are Oxalobacter bacteria. And Oxalobacter literally serve for the primary reason of breaking down oxalate and kind of digesting and neutralizing or kind of, eliminating the oxalate from our intestines so that we have full access to the minerals that the oxalates carry into our body. So the more oxalate-rich plant foods that we eat, the more Oxalobacter bacteria that we create in our gut, and that proliferation of those microbes helps us to break down the oxalate and then have more access to our calcium, our magnesium, and all of our other big and trace minerals that we consume from our whole plant foods. So you could kind of theoretically come up with this idea that, okay, like if someone was eating a processed food diet or an animal-based diet, a low fiber diet, not really exposed to a lot of high oxalate and mineral rich whole plant foods, then they have like this big, this big salad or something like that. And, that maybe they've got like a glass of milk, which we'll just say the glass of milk, the quintessential kind of omnivorous source of calcium. And we've got our glass of milk, and then we've got our big green leafy salad. And since the glass of milk doesn't have any oxalates, but it has a ton of calcium in it, then they're going to get way more calcium from the glass of milk than they would from the salad, because the salad contains the calcium locked up in with the oxalates. So they don't have the Oxalobacter bacteria to break down and tear apart those oxalates and give your body access to the calcium. So yeah, then you could like kind of, compare these two foods, a glass of milk versus a green leafy salad, and say, oh yeah, for sure, we're going to get a lot more calcium from the glass of milk. But if you give a glass of milk and a bowl of salad, or like a big, a big calcium rich plant-based, meal in whatever way, to someone who has a healthy microbiome that is, has an abundant amount of Oxalobacter bacteria, then they're going to be able to access all of the calcium and also other minerals that are bound up in those green leafy vegetables and other plant foods. So hopefully that makes sense. The goal here is to, again, diversify the gut microbiome and allow our Oxalobacter species to proliferate so that they can work with us and support us in gaining access to those minerals. Now, I can't really talk about calcium without also discussing, of course, all the other minerals for one, but maybe more importantly is vitamin D. and vitamin K. Vitamin D and vitamin K are both essential vitamins for regulating our calcium absorption and where calcium is directed in our body. And of course, vitamin D doesn't come from food. Vitamin D is synthesized by our own bodies when we're exposed to sunlight. But vitamin K, is bound up in the same green leafy vegetables and the same whole plant foods that are abundantly rich in calcium and oxalates. These foods are also just so happen to be rich in vitamin K, which kind of gets you scratching your head like, wait a second. So I've just got to eat this salad. I just have to eat this, green juice. I just have to eat these plants. I just have to eat whole plant foods. And I get my calcium and all the other minerals and the vitamin K. And yeah, there's some oxalate in there, but my that actually nourishes my gut microbes. So it's all this harmonious process of getting nourishment and nutrition into our bodies. It's almost like the universe and nature kind of planned this or orchestrated this and kind of is guiding humans to eat whole plant foods for the full optimal nourishment. It's funny how that all works out. So that's again kind of what's available when we're focusing on the whole plant foods. We get all of the things. We get the oxalates, which I guess right off, like I kind of jumped ahead here. But oxalates, like what another term for them are just phytonutrients. They're a class of phytonutrients, nutrients that are found in plants. So we don't need to be afraid of them. So let's talk about kidney stones for a little bit before we talk about kind of systemic inflammatory issues. I already said how I kind of classify myself as being probably in the top 1% of oxalate consumption out of all human beings on the planet. And I have never developed a calcium oxalate stone. I work with lots of people who, one of our goals is, I guess you could say, increasing oxalate consumption in the form of whole plant foods. And out of all the people that I've had the privilege of working with, I've never seen anyone increase their oxalate consumption and develop a kidney stone. And again, it begs the question, like it makes you scratch your head. Well, why is that? I just read on the internet that oxalates are associated with increased kidney stone formation. And like I already said, 95% of the time when someone does develop a kidney stone, they find the stone and they analyze it, and it is composed of calcium oxalate. So it's like, how is that oxalate stone forming? And again, it's a lot more of a complex issue than just eating too many oxalates, if you get the idea. Because if it was just a matter of eating too many oxalates, then I should be having kidney stones like every day. And if I was having kidney stones every day, I would sure as heck stop eating spinach and stop eating all these high oxalate whole plant foods. So you must be asking the question along with me, what really is causing kidney stones? And kidney stones, it's a unique process that happens when we have the perfect environment within the kidneys to create stones. So the perfect environment for creating stones is one that is acidic. And of course, the kidneys are responsible for filtering our blood and also kind of buffering and maintaining mineral balance in our body. It's really a complex process. But essentially, if we have too much acidity in our system, the kidneys are responsible for buffering that. And one of the ways that they do is by loading up on things like calcium and oxalate that serve as buffers for the acidity. And that calcium and oxalate that gets, what am I trying to say? It's concentrated in the kidneys as a buffering agent. It starts to crystallize in the kidneys. And of course, those crystals can form and grow and become really painful and then get lodged in our ureters and cause excruciating pain. And we don't want that to happen. But again, it's not the consequence of eating too many oxalates. It's the consequence of the improper acid balance in the body and specifically in the kidney. So what causes acidity in the kidney? Well, there's three main things. One is just processed foods. When we have processed foods that are low in nutrient density, those foods, when digested, when metabolized, when broken down, move the body toward an acidic kind of direction. And the other thing that moves the body kind of predictably, reliably in that direction of acidity is animal protein. And the reason for that is that, animal protein contains sulfur-based amino acids like cysteine and methionine that actually create a sulfuric acid when broken down by our bodies, by our enzymes. So animal protein and processed foods, just as a big class, create acidity in the kidneys. And then also things like caffeine and alcohol, those compounds acidify the kidneys as well. And the thing that makes matters worse and kind of like, exacerbates the whole issue is the context of dehydration. Someone's who's, has acidity in the kidneys, caffeine and alcohol, and is also chronically dehydrated. That's the perfect scenario to create a kidney stone. Now, fortunately, most people who are eating a lot of animal products and processed foods, I guess, fortunately, those people are not eating a lot of oxalates, right? They're not eating lots of salads. Maybe if they are, it's just like a few leaves here and there. It's iceberg lettuce and romaine lettuce. It's not like a big chopped spinach salad with like all these other high oxalate foods. So fortunately, they're staying away from the oxalates. But, if you could imagine a situation where someone is, has this, processed food diet, animal rich diet, and then maybe they want to go on a cleanse, cool, good for you. Go on a cleanse and you go straight from this high kind of processed food diet, this acidic diet, and then you start flooding the body with high oxalate foods, green drinks and spinach smoothies and you name it. That is kind of like the perfect scenario to create some kidney stones. And then you could just imagine like someone goes from eating their sausage and egg McMuffin and drinks this green drink and then develops kidney stones. And it's like, shoot, I'm never drinking a green drink again. That damn spinach smoothie, like, what the heck? And then your doctor confirms, like, oh, yeah, it looks like you got a calcium oxalate kidney stone. Stay away from spinach. Keep eating your egg McMuffins. And it's like, come on, we got to be asking the question, why is a spinach smoothie creating kidney stones? And it's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. The body has this acidic environment, a perfect environment for the kidney stones to form. And the answer to reversing that acidic environment just so happens to be eating less processed food, less animal products, and another way, eating more whole food plant-based. Eating more whole food plant-based is kind of the best way to alkalinize the body, alkalinize the environment of the kidneys. And again, if we have an alkaline environment, literally, we could eat as much oxalate as we could possibly shove into our mouth. And it is impossible to form a kidney stone when we have a balanced alkaline environment. So you might be asking, like, how can I assess the acidity in my body? Is there a way to do that? And there's one crude way that's not super precise, but it gives some idea. And that's simply peeing on a little pH strip. And that's a good way to measure the general pH within the kidney that's being filtrated through the kidney. So you want your urine to be on the alkaline side of the spectrum. And most people, unfortunately, are not. They're on the acidic side of the spectrum. So that's one thing that you can do to just kind of check yourself. And if you are peeing alkaline, you can kind of rest assured that there's no real way that you can create calcium oxalate kidney stones. So that's cool. And lastly, I want to wrap up talking about this whole idea that, again, is on the internet, oxalates being linked with, systemic issues, like autoimmune kind of things and gut health issues and so on and so forth. And, I think it's pervasive in kind of like the paleo carnivore community, eating like you got to stay away from green leafy vegetables because oxalates are kind of this nutritional supervillain that's going to be the cause of all the issues. And again, you kind of hear where I'm going with this. There's simply not a lot of science to suggest that that is anything near the truth. That being said, again, if someone doesn't eat any oxalate containing foods, if someone doesn't eat many plant-based foods, if someone's eating like a processed food diet and a lot of animal products and so on and so forth, and then they sit down and enjoy, a spinach salad again, and maybe a black bean burger, a baked potato, and this like awesome plant-based meal, right? They're probably going to experience some gas and bloating, a little bit of quote unquote inflammation in the gut. And the issue there, the reason why that is because their microbiome has been in such a state of like kind of quiescence. It's just kind of been existing. There hasn't been a lot of action and proliferation and growth and diversity happening within the gut. So we introduce all of these unique fibers and phytonutrients, and we kind of overwhelm the environment. And when we overwhelm the environment, it's not a pathological thing. It's not going to like create any sort of disease, but it is going to cause some sort of acute inflammation and bloating and these kind of digestive issues. And I love to bring up the analogy of like going to the gym. If you have been sitting on the couch for the last few months and finally you got the great idea of like going into the gym and lifting some weights and doing some squats and following an exercise routine, you go to the gym, maybe it feels good, but like you leave the gym and you go home and you get some sleep and you wake up the next morning and you're sore. And it's like, holy shit, like my body feels like a mess. What did I do? And it's like that gym broke me. That gym wrecked me. What did the gym do? I'm never going back to the gym. And of course, this sounds silly because you know that going to the gym and exercising your muscles and using new muscles and developing new neural pathways and breaking things down and stressing your body in this controlled sort of way is ultimately a healthy way to grow and adapt. So you know that just being sore after going to the gym is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean the gym is wrong. And that's the same kind of thing when eating our high fiber rich, phytonutrient rich whole plant foods. We might experience some short term effects depending on if we haven't been exercising our gut microbes in a sufficient sort of way. But that doesn't mean that our fiber rich, phytonutrient rich whole plant foods are inherently wrong or bad, or we should avoid them. We should actually, if we do experience any sort of acute kind of, bloating or digestive issue, we should kind of lean into that in a gentle and mindful way. We shouldn't run and turn and go the other way. We shouldn't avoid those sorts of foods. We should move into those foods because really what that's pointing out is that we have some gaps and deficiencies in terms of our microbiome biodiversity. And the way to fill those gaps is by mindfully and maybe in a controlled and obviously clean and organic and thoughtful and grounded sort of way with proper food hygiene and all these practices and ideas that are super important. But we want to eat more food. We want to eat more diversity. We don't want to kind of pigeonhole ourselves in this restricted state where we have quote unquote food sensitivities to all of these sorts of foods. We want to move the other direction where we have like a limitless freedom and are able to digest and process everything that we put into our body. And all of those things are allowing our body to grow and adapt and are allowing our microbiome to proliferate. That's kind of the goal here. And as I also wanted to throw out a pretty remarkable statistic, I guess you could say, a little fun fact. Maybe you knew that the human genome is composed of about 20,000 genes. Well, I want to ask you a question. How many genes do you think are in the microbiome? All of the bacteria strains that make up the human microbiome, how many genes do they have? Our human body has 20,000. How many genes do you think are in the microbiome? Well, I certainly couldn't guess this. It's upwards of 20 million genes. So our microbiome is 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times more genetically complex than our human body. Whew, it's like, that's mind boggling. It really begs the question, like, what are we doing here? We are really more the microbes, more the other stuff than we are human beings. And again, so I guess like what I'm getting at here is one of our roles, I feel, is really being a steward for bacterial harmony and diversification. And as we live in more harmony and we actually create more resilience in terms of our gut health. Maybe I don't want to go down a whole gut health tangent, but just real quick, when we do develop more biodiversity in the gut, when we do eat more diverse, fiber-rich whole plant foods that are also oxalate rich, because oxalates are found in whole plant foods, we develop more biodiversity in the gut. And as we develop more biodiversity in the gut, we create this mucus layer that's just like this nice, smooth, kind of resilient barrier between our gut cells and the outside world. Therefore, we have more kind of resistance to, you could say, infection or toxin exposure, or these sorts of things. And that is really a good thing to have. That ultimately that more resilience. So I guess that's about a wrap here. The moral of the story is that, of course, oxalates and any other phytonutrient or any other fiber or plant compound is not anything to be afraid of. We are adaptive and incredibly capable of meeting the environment and matching the environment that we expose our bodies to. And when we do flood ourselves with high nutrient rich, fiber rich whole plant foods, we cultivate more biodiversity in the gut that allows us to process and I guess I'm fumbling for my words at this point, but it allows us to just be in more harmony and have more resilience and resistance to all the stress that we might otherwise experience. So yes, I guess that's a wrap on the topic of oxalates. Again, I hope that this helps you and kind of helps you dispel and eliminate any fearful thinking around eating too many oxalates. Again, the moral of the story is that when we have the proper environment, we don't have to fear any of these things. Well, we never really have to fear them, but maybe it does make sense to be mindful of oxalate consumption if we do have an acidic environment of our kidneys. For sure, it makes sense to be mindful of those kind of things. But the goal is to create alkalinity in our kidneys and the rest of our body. That's the real take-home message. And also the biodiversity message, and also just the message of trusting your body's adaptive resilience. And reminder of those two announcements, one being the Whole Food Plant-Based Challenge. That is, I don't think I threw out dates for that because I don't have them on the top of my head, but I believe it's starting on the 19th or 17th, or anyway, in a couple weeks here in February. And you can find out more at www.alter.health. And then for just $11 a month, you can receive healthy, healing, nourishing whole plant food meals delivered to your email inbox, crafted by Dr. Susanna. And you can find out more about that at www.alter.health/meal guides. And in addition to that, we actually host a monthly, and soon it will be twice monthly, meal guide membership support call. So find out more at www.alter.health. And thanks as always for tuning in. Feel free to drop any questions or comments, or feel free to share this information with someone who is confused about oxalates. And I look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast. Peace and love.